So we're going to jump right into the video. Starting at number 10, here we have living things formed from water. And the Quran says, "Do those who disbelieve not see that the heavens and the earth were sewn together, and then we unstitched them, and that we made from water every living thing? So will they not then believe?" And that's taken from Surah 21 verses 30. Also in Surah 24 verses 45, it says, "Allah created every living creature from water." Geological studies have confirmed that water is not only the first and the main compound in all living things, but also it precedes the existence of all created beings. Next up at number 9, we have the duality of creation. The Quran specifically says, "And it is He who spread out the earth and set thereon mountains standing firm and flowing rivers, and the fruit of every kind He made in pairs, 2 and 2, male and female. He draws the night as a veil over the day. Behold, verily in these things are signs for those who reflect." This is taken from Surah 13 verses 3. Here we see things created in pairs. Now there's another verse in the Quran that says, "He who has made for you the earth like a carpet spread out, has enabled you to go about therein by roads and channels, and has sent down water from the sky. With it we have produced diverse pairs of plants." And that's taken from Surah 20 verses 53. The Quran has several verses like this. Another one, as an example, "Glory be to Him who created all the pairs from what the earth produces, and from themselves, and from things unknown to them." And that's taken from Surah 36 verses 36. Moving on now to number 8, we're going to be looking at the female honeybee. Now check this out. Honeybees have 3 various forms. There's a queen bee, that's the reproductive female. Then there's the drone bee, which is the male. And then the worker bees are the non-reproductive females. Each of these have their role. The non-reproductive female bee is responsible for making the honey. And that's what the Quran speaks about in Surah 16 verses 68 to 69. It says as follows, "Your Lord revealed to the bees, build dwellings in the mountains and the trees, and also in the structures which men erect. Then eat from every kind of fruit and travel the paths of your Lord, which have been made easy for you to follow. From inside them comes a drink of varying colors, containing healing for mankind. There is certainly a sign in that for people who reflect." So in this verse, the verbs build, eat, and travel, they're written in the female form in the original Arabic language. But while we're on the topic of bees and honey, we have to mention at number 7 that honey brings healing. In chapter 16 of the Quran is Surah Al-Nahl, and that is translated as the bees in English. In this chapter, specifically in verse 69, this is what it has to say. "Then eat from all of the fruits and follow the ways of your Lord laid down for you. There emerges from their bellies a drink varying in colors, in which there's healing for people. Indeed, this is a sign for those who reflect." So I pretty much just read that in the previous entry, but research now shows that antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties are found in honey. It also helps against infections and in the regrowth of tissue when our body is healing. Honey also contains antioxidants that help to prevent heart problems and cancer. Let's talk about gender at number 6. The Quran states that one's masculinity or femininity is actually created out of a drop of sperm that has been ejected. And the Quran says the following, "He has created both sexes, male and female, from a drop of semen which has been ejected." That's taken from Surah 53 verses 45 to 46. And now it's widely known that human sex is determined by the male's sperm, with the female cells playing really no role in the sex determination process. Another miracle mentioned in the Quran is the alaqah that clings to the uterus. Now, the following is a passage from the Quran. It says, Then we formed the drop into an alaka and formed the alaka into a lump and formed the lump into bones and clothed the bones in flesh and then brought him into being as another creature. Glory be to Allah, the best of creators. This is taken from Surah 23 verses 14. Now, one thing to note is that the Arabic word alaka is used to describe leeches that cling to a body and feed off of the blood inside of the body. And it can be translated to mean a thing that clings to something. So comparing a leech to an embryo at the alaka stage, we can see that there's similarities between the two of them, not just in appearance, but also in function as well. And the word alaka can also be translated as blood clot. And we can see that the appearance of the embryo and its sacs during the alaka stage actually looks like a blood clot. Number 4 brings us humans formed in stages. Human reproduction, as science tells us, it actually takes place in various different stages. And the Quran also mentions this. In Surah 71, God created you in stages. Also, the Quran says He creates you in the wombs of your mothers in stages, one development after another in 3 layers of darkness. That's taken from Surah 39 verses 6. Another pretty interesting miracle found in the Quran is about the prefrontal cortex. So check this out. The front part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex, and it's responsible for coming up with lies. According to PubMed.gov, people who just lie, known as pathological liars, have more prefrontal white matter. And the Quran said that the disbelievers will be dragged from their lying forehead. In the Quran, Surah 96 verses 15 to 16, we can find a passage that says this, "But no, if he does not desist, he will certainly drag him by the forelock, a lying sinful forelock." Now, this is also translated as forehead. The original Arabic word nasya in this case refers to the frontal lobe of the brain where reasoning is processed, and from there people can come up with lies. Number 2 is also very fascinating. It's talking about bones that are formed before muscles. The first formation of actual bone happens at the jawbone at around 41 days, and then about 3 days later the muscles are formed. And now, we did read the following passage at number 5 in this episode, but there is something else to notice in the passage. Just to recap, it goes as follows. Then we formed the drop into an alaka and formed the alaka into a lump and formed the lump into bones and clothed the bones in flesh and then brought him into being as another creature. Glory be to Allah, the best of creators. So what we can also see in this passage is the sequential formation of bones and flesh. And to end this episode off, we are going to be talking about fasting and its medical benefits. The Quran does mention this in Surah 2 verses 184. It says, "O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, that you may become righteous, for a specified number of days. But whoever among you is sick or on a journey, then a number of other days. For those who are able, a ransom of feeding a needy person. But whoever volunteers goodness, it is better for him. But to fast is best for you, if you only knew." Nowadays, we know that intermittent fasting has been linked to numerous health benefits. And some of those benefits include reducing the risk of diabetes, reducing inflammation in the body, as well as lowering your blood pressure and also balancing your weight. It, however, is recommended that you consult with a medical professional when it comes to fasting, but studies do show that yes, fasting does have many benefits. So let's take a look. Starting at number 10, Surah Nuh, also known as Noah. In Surah Nuh, which is the 71st chapter of the Quran, it has 28 verses in this chapter, and that makes the difference between these two numbers 43, as 71 take away 28 equals 43. And something that Muslims point to is that it turns out that the prophet Nuh, or Noah, is mentioned in the Quran exactly 43 times. Besides this, there are 43 chapters following Surah Nuh until the end of the Quran. And these 43 chapters contain no mention of Noah at all. Also, the chapters of the Quran that do mention the prophet Nuh, they're 28 in total, which is the exact number number of verses in Surah Nuh. Number 9 leads us to the math miracle in Surah Al-Naml. In Surah Al-Naml, which is the 27th chapter of the Quran, there's a total of 93 verses in this chapter. Now this chapter begins with apparent random letters, and in Surah 21 verses 1, this is what it says: Ta Sin. These are the verses of the Quran and a clear book. Now, the term Ta and Sin, which are written as single unit and pronounced together as Ta Sin, the first letter appears throughout the chapter 27 times, which also, of course, is the chapter number. And also the second apparently random letter appears 93 times, which is the exact number of verses in that chapter. Surah Al-Naml comes in at number 8. Another thing to note is that the code of 16 found in Surah Al-Naml, which is in the 16th chapter of the Quran, there's a note that the male bees, known as drones, have 16 chromosomes, while the female worker bees as well as the queen bees have 16 pairs of chromosomes. On top of that, another thing to note is that the queen bees emerge from the egg in 16 days, and the number of verses in this chapter is 128, which is a multiple of 16, because 16 times 8 is 128. And of course, half of the number 128 is 64, which is another multiple of 16. And researchers have found that 64 of this chapter's verses contain the name of Allah, while 64 of them do not contain the name of Allah. Let's look at the math miracle now in Surah 96. First verses of the Quran that Muslims believe were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad were the first 5 verses of chapter 96, and in the Quran that says, "Recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Recite, and your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not." That's specifically found in Surah 96 verses 1 to 5. Now the name of the chapter is the Alaq, which scholars have described as an early stage of a human being inside of the womb. And now the Arabic word Alaq, which translates to clinging substance, is the 9th word in the Arabic surah. Now the 9th prime number in math is 23, which is the exact number of DNA chromosome pairs found in humans. The miracle at number 6 involves prime numbers. Prime numbers, which have confused mathematicians for many years. They make up a really strong and recurring key element throughout the Quran. Another prominent key element in the Quran includes specific words and numbers such as 114, which is the total number of chapters in the Quran. So I'll probably leave some of those for part 2. There's a whole lot of math miracles associated with the Quran. Continuing now with number 5, let's look at the math miracle in Surah 83. So in 2 places, the 83rd surah speaks of numerically structured books. Now the term numerically structured books in Arabic is the term Kitabun Markum. And these verses are believed to be evidence of God encoding the books and evidence of God being involved in the mathematical systems. And we read in the Quran, Surah 83 verses 7 to 9, it says, "Indeed, the book of the wicked is Sijin." Do you know what Sijin is? A numerically structured book. The math miracle involving opposites comes next. In Surah 89 verses 3, it says, "And by the even number and the odd number." So, as it's noted in the Quran, the number of angels and devils were both mentioned 88 times. Heat and coolness are both mentioned 4 times. Summer and winter are both mentioned once. Woman and man were both mentioned 24 times. Worry and assurance were mentioned 13 times each, as well as belief and disbelief are both mentioned 9 times. There's also a math miracle found in the 9th chapter of the Quran. So the first statement in the Quran is, "In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful." By the way, that consists of 19 Arabic letters known as the Basmala. It's actually the preface of every chapter except chapter 9 in the Quran. And although it is missing from chapter 9, when you look 19 chapters later, the Basmala happens twice in the Quran. So chapter 27 has a statement at its beginning, and in the verse 30 it says, "Indeed it is from Solomon, and indeed it reads, in the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful." So this makes a total number of times that the Basmala occurs in the Quran 114, or 19 times 6 times, which is equal to the number of chapters in the Quran. Number 2 involves a miracle about many different numbers in the Quran. So yes, there are so many different ones, and as a matter of fact, number 7 is one of the main ones that come up in the Quran. So it seems like this number has a strong relationship with the way our universe was actually created and structured according to Muslim theology, because it's believed that the earth actually has 7 layers, as well as the atmosphere has 7 layers. It's believed that the universe has 7 different skies. This is often referred to as heavens. The sky, heavens, sometimes are used interchangeably. Also, the number of verses in the Quran that refer to the 7 skies is actually 7. And the first time the number 7 is mentioned in the Quran, it was in chapter 2 verses 29, when the Quran says, "It is he who created for you all of that which is on the earth. Then he directed himself to the heaven, his being above all creation, and made them 7 heavens, and he is knowing of all things." And the final time the number 7 is mentioned in the Quran is in chapter 78 verses 12, where it says, "And constructed above you 7 strong heavens." And the final math miracle in this episode that I'm going to share with you has to do with the earth. So this is a very fascinating thing. Let's take a look at the number of times that the term month was mentioned in the Quran, and that is 12 times. Day is also mentioned 365 times. Sea is mentioned 32 times. Land is mentioned 13 times. And sea plus land, which is 32 plus 13, equal 45. Now, apparently modern science has only recently discovered that the following figures actually represent the exact proportions of the sea and land on Earth. So the percentage of sea is 32 over 45 times 100%, which is 71%. And the percentage of land that the Earth is made up of goes by the figure of 13 over 45 times 100, which equals 28.8, and a whole bunch of 8s follow there, and that's a percentage. So it's about 71.1% of sea makes up the Earth, as well as 28.8% of the Earth is made up of land. At number 10, we're looking at the expansion of the universe. We all know that Einstein proposed that the universe is expanding, like present tense. It's presently expanding right now. And this discovery actually shocked the world. For decades, scientists believed that the universe exploded after the Big Bang, and it had been slowing down ever since that time. But according to science, they were actually mistaken. The expansion of the universe has recently accelerated. And this mysterious re-expansion is propelled by what is known as dark energy. And this mysterious anti-gravity began pushing the universe outwards again about 5 billion years ago, according to scientists anyways. Now, the Quran actually describes this expansion, and Muslims point this out in Surah 51 verses 48, that the Quran says this, "And we have built the heaven with might, and we continue to expand it indeed." Number 9 is also about the universe, but this is the universe ending. So the Quran actually informs about scientific phenomena that are still being debated to this day. The end of the universe is one such topic that is debated. Will it continue to expand indefinitely, or will it eventually collapse in itself? But the Quran actually does shed some light on this. It goes as follows. "Remember the day when we shall roll up the heavens like the rolling up of written scrolls by a scribe. As we began the first creation, so shall we repeat it. A promise binding upon us. We shall certainly perform it." This is taken from Surah 21 verses 105. And this description actually fits into the debate of the universe, whether or not it will collapse into a black hole, and the fabric of space, like rolls of parchment, would be drawn into by angular momentum, and then a new universe would appear. And Muslims say it's only a matter of time before physicists confirm that this is actually how the universe is going to end up. Number 8 leads us to evolution. The first description of biological evolution are found in the writings of Muslim scientists, apparently. Theological authorities were thus forced to look with disfavor on the Mohammedan theory of the evolution of man from lower forms, or his gradual development to his present condition in the long lapse of time. And this was written by John William Draper in The History of Conflict Between Science and Religion in 1874. Now, the concept is actually taken from the Quranic verses. It goes as follows. What is the matter with you that you do not ascribe dignity to Allah? And certainly He has created you in stages, and Allah has raised you from the earth like the raising of vegetation. And these words are in Surah 71 verses 15 to 16 and 18. So these verses explain that man is actually developed by undergoing various stages and adopting different forms. Evolution? Muslims say that, yeah, this is describing that. In at the number 7 spot, let's take a brief look at embryology. The Quranic account is supported by modern observations. Verily, we created man from an extract of clay, then we placed him as a drop of sperm in a safe depository. Then we fashioned the sperm into a clot. Then we fashioned the clot into a shapeless lump. Then we fashioned bones out of this shapeless lump. Then we clothed the bones with flesh. Then we developed it into another creation. So blessed be Allah, the best of creators. And that's found in Surah 23 verses 13 to 15. So Muslims point out the accuracy as well as the sequence and the depth of this verse is definitely surprising and miraculous at the same time. From there, let's look at number 6. What's under mountains? Modern technology has explained what is under mountains, but the Quran said this over a millennia ago. Now, there's a passage in the Quran that goes like this. Didn't we make the earth a bed and the mountains pegs? And that's found in the Quran, Surah 78 verses 7. So mountains are described as pegs here, and awan is the word that means roots. Surprisingly, modern geology has discovered that mountains have deep roots that extend into the Earth's crust. The miraculous thing at number 5 is rainfall is actually predetermined. Have you ever wondered why on certain days it's like a little bit of rain and then on other days it's like literally downpours that cause flooding and all of that? While some people may look at this as, well, it's just coincidence or it happens by chance, while Muslims say that the Quran actually claims otherwise. In Surah 43 verses 11, we find a passage that says this, and who sends down rain from the sky in measured amounts, and we revive a dead land by doing so. It said that every second 16 million tons of water evaporate from the earth, requiring the same amount to be replenished by rain. And Muslims teach that Allah maintains this balance throughout the water cycle process. And even minor differences can actually cause major ecological imbalances. Next up, let's talk about the shielding layer. Until the 20th century, scientists were unaware that the sky served as a protective ceiling, like a shielding layer, literally. And in the Quran, Surah 21 verses 32, it says this, and we made the sky a protected ceiling, but they are turning away from its signs. The sun, of course, emits energy at various wavelengths, and the shorter the wavelength, the greater the potential for harm. However, some of this energy is actually required for critical functions like photosynthesis in plants, as well as vitamin D production in humans. So there is definitely a natural mechanism that keeps the dangerous waves away from the Earth. But of course, not all the sun's rays are harmful. Like I mentioned, we do need some, but yeah, literally the harmful ones get filtered away. The sky is a protective ceiling. Coming at the number 3 spot, orbits have specific paths. Surah 21 verses 33 of the Quran tells us this, and he created night and day, the sun and the moon, all heavenly bodies in orbit are swimming. So every day the sun rises at its appointed time, and it's neither early nor late. It rises at its appointed time. And when it sets, the moon takes its place and remains there until the early morning hours. The day takes over after each night, and vice versa. The galaxies have their systems, the celestial bodies have well-defined orbits, and things just work in cycles. For years, it's been happening like this. It just does it. Moving on to number 2, extraterrestrial life. In search for extraterrestrial intelligence, Frank Drake conducted the first modern SETI experiment in 1960. But the Quran also mentions this, and I quote, and among his signs is the creation of the heaven and the earth, and of whatever living creatures.
He has spread forth in both, and he has the power to gather them together when he wills so. That's found in Surah 42 verses 30. So in this verse, Muslims point out that the Quran speaks of creatures on earth and those in heaven, implying that humans could meet these creatures one day, if Allah wills. We end this episode off at number 1 with the Big Bang. With the discovery of the Big Bang Theory, of course, Einstein definitely changed the whole world of science. But Muslims teach that there's actually few people that realize that the Quran described the Big Bang over 1400 years ago. Do the unbelievers not see that the heavens and the earth were once a closed up mass before we opened them up? And we created all living things out of water. Will they not believe it then? And that's found in Surah 21 verses 30.